Companies in the minerals supply chain need to show that they source responsibly. Our joint due diligence standard gives suppliers a tool to do so for copper, lead, nickel, or zinc, as well as any other metals produced alongside them. In this course, we'll show you the processes to put in place to meet the joint due diligence standard. By doing so, you can assure your customers that you responsibly source from partners and control materials in your own operations. For now, let's look at the joint due diligence standard and see how it applies to your company. When companies buy materials from suppliers, they face risks. For instance, a supplier may be involved in money laundering or conceal the true origin of their materials. One could even be linked to abuses by security forces, armed groups, or violations of human rights. Companies are held accountable for managing these risks by conducting due diligence. All metal brands listed on the London Metals Exchange now have to show that they meet the LME's new responsible sourcing requirements. The brands must have an audit of their due diligence systems, comparing them with a standard aligned with the OECD guidance. Companies are assessed through third-party assurance programs like Copper Marks and the Responsible Minerals Initiative's assurance programs. Their auditors can use the joint due diligence standard to assess your site and systems for compliance. The standard aligns with the OECD guidance. That means it was designed to meet LME requirements, and it meets the requirements of customers, stakeholders, and due diligence regulations. Unlike previous standards, the joint due diligence standard applies specifically to copper, lead, nickel, and zinc. For example, if your business is in copper, lead, nickel, zinc, or their byproducts, JDD is the first standard that applies to you. It's no longer necessary to develop your own OECD-aligned standard. The standard outlines the practices to put in place so that you can source responsibly, even from high-risk areas. Wherever you source, it defines the level of due diligence needed to provide assurance that you're managing the risks in your supply chains. If you have existing management systems for part of your business, the standard recognizes those systems. For example, suppose your company is integrated with a mine and smelter at the same site. JDD recognizes your existing policies and procedures for responsible sourcing. Does the standard apply to your company? It applies to all companies in the mineral supply chain up to the processor, mines, traders, exporters, and smelters or refiners. This includes any company extracting, producing, or trading copper, lead, zinc, and all forms of nickel. It does not include companies that only explore material deposits. Which materials could be included in the scope of the assessment? Your company decides which materials to include in scope as part of the pre-assessment process. The standard says you should include all the metal products at your sites during the assessment period. That means any materials you extract, receive, hold, or process, including byproducts and materials you have through tolling agreements. Some companies may produce several metals on site. For example, if your company processes nickel with byproducts of copper and magnesium, those are also included in scope. When you define the scope, consider any additional customer or regulatory requirements that apply to you. To demonstrate that you meet those requirements, you'll need to ensure the audit assesses your site against those standards also. For instance, if you include gold byproduct in your assessment scope, there may be additional requirements beyond the joint standard. To meet regulatory requirements, you would also need to show that your practices are aligned with the OECD Gold Supplement, not covered by the joint standard. In the next units, we'll show you the JDD standard requirements for purchasing and managing materials at your site. The assessment is conducted at site level. Auditors will review the due diligence that you carry out with your supply chain. They'll seek to verify that your company activities, policies, procedures, and processes are in line with the Joint Due Diligence Standard. The assessment looks at alignment to the OECD guidance. Key assessment areas include management systems, red flags identification, risk assessment, management of risks of adverse impacts and actual adverse impacts, and reporting. We'll explain how each of these steps work in the next units.